Our next stop in the Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary Tour brings us back along the Prairie Trail, where Dan McGinnis, bird expert and former director of the National Audubon Society's Mississippi River Program, discusses the important bird habitat found within the sanctuary.
This wetland is really one stop in a whole series of important places along the Mississippi River Flyway, from the Gulf Coast all the way up to the headwaters, over 2,000 miles of river corridor. And really the flyway is even much longer than that. It goes from the tip of South America, where some birds migrate all the way up through the Mississippi River corridor to Canada, the boreal forest, and the Arctic. But here at Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary, we have the kind of habitat that birds really appreciate. We've got wetlands habitat, we have prairie, and eventually oak savanna, and we have the forested bluffs. And they really kind of represent the ideal cross-section of the Mississippi River Valley. We've got this diversity of habitat that attracts big birds like the American bald eagle. We have the big birds like the egrets. We have the waterfowl, geese, and blue-winged teal, and mallards resting here on the wetland. And even in the wintertime, we have a source of water over here that comes out of a spring at a constant 55-degree temperature year-round. And the birds will actually huddle around this open water here in the wintertime. We have small birds that love to use this place, the cardinals, the blue jays. In the spring, the warbler migration through here is phenomenal. In fact, overall, there are over 300 bird species that use the Mississippi River Flyway at some part of their life cycle. And this area is so important that Audubon has designated it an important bird area. This area is one of several important bird areas that have been determined through nominating panels by scientists and resource managers to be areas worth protecting. So we have this cross-section of the valley here, and there's really an interesting interplay among these habitats. You'll see large birds like the red-tailed hawk sitting in a tree up here, and the next thing you know, it's coming down into the prairie here to grab a mouse or a snake for lunch. And so they're aware that they need these high places to sit and rest and watch for food, but they need these low grassy areas for their prey to actually live. So there's this very interesting combination of habitats, and that really adds to the attractiveness and the importance of this area for birds.
Our next stop in the Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary Tour brings us further into the park, where we learn about Dakota culture in relationship to the sanctuary.
We call this the chanchega, the drum. And you were just hearing the chante, the heartbeat. And you can hear that word chante, chanchega. Chang is tree, chante is heart, chanchega is drum. Word for tobacco is chandi, and we put tobacco on the big drum to make that good connection, to send our voices in a good way to sky from the earth, and that we would be in relationship. And that's that connectedness that we have from the roots of the tree that connect to the Milky Way river above. And when we make these songs, we're hopefully sending a good voice, Hoyewashte, to all our relatives. Waziata, the north. Itokagata, south. Wiochiampata, east. Wiochpeata, west, as the sun rises and sets. So that solar rise and set, sunrise, sunset. And you think of all the heartbeats that our ancestors have had here, all the breaths in and out, all of the lives that have born and died have been part of the circle in this place as relatives. Hamitakesin. These burial mounds on this bluff, if you think of the symbolism, a pregnant woman's belly is very rounded like that bluff and full of life. And for us it is that circle. It's a coming forth and a going back. We are between earth and sky in that circle. This is a place that should have a lot of feminine relationship and understanding, and to see what happened with the railroads and even the brewery, and the fact that this other cave over here was used to store beer and keep it cold. We wouldn't want alcohol in our mother's womb. There's a painful history, but there can also be joy and hope in the new birth. And hopefully in the telling of these stories, it can be a new beginning, a new understanding for all of us as relatives.
Our next stop in the Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary tour brings us to the long concrete railroad maintenance pads, where we learn about the area's rail and transportation history.
This sign interprets the railroad history of the Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary. And as you can see behind me, there's these long concrete, they look like sidewalks, but they're really part of an unwheeling yard for the trains that used to be lined up all along here. This was a massive railroad yard by the 1880s and 1890s and into the early 20th century. In fact, from the 1870s to the early 1920s, St. Paul really becomes much more of a railroad town than a steamboat town. It begins as a steamboat city. Initially, steamboats start coming up the Mississippi in 1823 with the Virginia, the first steamboat to come up the river. And by the 1850s, steamboat traffic starts to really pick up. By 1857, steamboats come and go 1,000 times from St. Paul, bringing all kinds of immigrants. Railroads really don't come in until after the Civil War here. Downriver at Rock Island, the first railroad reaches the Mississippi in 1854. It's the first railroad to cross it in 1856. But at that point, railroad expansion across the Mississippi and along it stops, due in part to an economic panic in 1857, and then the Civil War from 1861 to 65 interrupts further railroad expansion. As railroads began expanding up and along the Mississippi, St. Paul and St. Anthony, which is the city at St. Anthony Falls, joined the rush to railroad. In 1862, the first railroad run occurs here in St. Paul and goes from St. Paul to St. Anthony Falls, where Minneapolis is today. But after the Civil War, railroads began crossing the Mississippi. By 1880, there's over 13 railroads that have crossed the river. And they also start running railroad lines up the Mississippi River because it's flat, it's an even, easy grade. And so railroads start connecting cities along the Mississippi. By the late 19th century, steamboat traffic is essentially done on the Mississippi River. So railroads really come to dominate the Twin Cities area. And St. Paul becomes known as a railroad town from the late 19th century into the 1920s.
Our next stop in the Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary tour brings us to the brick building near the park entrance, where Carol Carey, chair of the Lower Phelan Creek Steering Committee, discusses the plan to redevelop the building into the multi-use Mneezaska Cultural Center.
This building right here is the focus of our next major effort. The building is the former Standard Oil building. It's a 36,000 square foot building that was built in 1914 and used as a warehouse. We are working together to develop and implement a vision for the property as an interpretive center. Early discussions have focused on transforming the structure into an eco-museum. The eco-museum itself would be very community-based with a lot of local engagement and would really focus on telling the stories of the immediate area. Initial engineering studies were done that determined that the building is structurally sound. And then we had some architectural conceptual drawings commissioned that conveyed how different features such as decks and additional windows and environmental features such as a green roof could be added. The sanctuary and the proposed eco-museum actually sit in a really unique location. It's a 10-minute walk from Lower Town. It sits right at the foot of the bluff from Mounts Park and Dayton's Bluff, as well as being the point at which 85 miles of regional trails converge. Today, it's not that hard for us to look at this building and picture a wonderful spot in the middle of the city where you can sit and relax with a cup of coffee and watch school groups coming in and out of the interpretive center, learning about the area's history, watching the St. Paul skyline and eagles flowing overhead.
Our final stop leaves us at the entry circle, where Sue Vento, community activist and wife of the late Congressman Bruce Vento, discusses her husband's legacy.
Bruce Vento's paternal grandparents settled near here when they came to this country, and his family lived just a short distance from here when he was a child. As a science educator and a public servant who cared deeply about preserving our environment and teaching future generations the many lessons a place such as this sanctuary provides, Bruce would be honored and humbled with his name being a part of this beautiful respite. Bruce served in the Minnesota legislature for 6 years, and then from 1976 until his death in 2000, he served as the Congressional District 4 representative in Washington, D.C. At the time of his death, he was recognized for his work on the environment. What a beautiful tribute to that legacy. As the renowned naturalist and author John Muir said, "In every walk with nature, one receives far more than he seeks."
This project has been made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund through the vote of Minnesotans on November 4th, 2008, and administered by the Minnesota Historical Society.